A designer baby is a term coined by the media to represent an embryo which has been altered to carry genes which parents can choose to express. Given the choice, would you rather have been born with a different eye color, hair color, or skin tone? Or perhaps, more importantly, without genes that carry potentially life-threatening illnesses such as PKU and cystic fibrosis? Is it ethical to pick and choose superior embryos and dispose of others? In this podcast, we will briefly review the human genome, explain how scientists can pick and choose certain traits, and explore the many ethical questions involved with this process.
Scientists have only recently begun to unravel the secrets behind the human genome, the blueprint for a human being. The entire mapping was completed about 8 years ago in 2003. But many questions remain unanswered about what each gene does and the exact mechanism upon which it functions. Where it stands now, we are able to manipulate the genes of embryos. We can think of the body as a giant and complicated code that scientists are trying to crack. Once this code is completely figured out, scientists believe it will lead to tremendous advances in disease prevention. The Human Genome Project is a huge step forward in unraveling the code. DNA in a human body is made up of about 3 billion base pairs, but only about 4% of these affect gene function. Today, researchers know the positions of multiple genes that control medical traits. Other genes are not yet completely understood, but are actively being researched, and understanding where genes are located opens all sorts of options. This leads us to genetic pre-screening.
The first in vitro fertilization was performed in 1978 for an infertile couple who wanted a child. In vitro fertilization involves extracting eggs from a woman's uterus, fertilizing them in a lab, and reinserting the zygote back into the uterus. This led to a procedure that allowed scientists to weed out any defective embryos, known as pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, or PGD. PGD is used during in vitro fertilization to test an embryo for any genetic abnormalities. This gives couples the option of choosing babies that will not have any possible inherited disorders. Common disorders that can easily be detected include Down syndrome, cystic fibrosis, Tay-Sachs disease, and hemophilia A. Some genetic disorders only affect one gender, such as hemophilia A. In a case where a pedigree shows a history of hemophilia, female embryos can be chosen to eliminate any risk. This raises an important question. Should parents be able to choose embryos purely on the basis of gender? Some people fear that this could lead to an imbalance between genders in the general population, predominantly in societies where boys are favored, such as China. While PGD enables us to pick out embryos that don't have genetic disorders and even choose gender, it is only the beginning of what genetic engineering can do. This leads us to our central topic, custom-ordered babies with chosen traits such as hair and eye color, what the media calls designer babies.
The idea of manipulating genes isn't surprising. This already happens in goats and cows to increase and enrich milk production. Mice have been injected with genes believed to cause Alzheimer's disease. Jellyfish genes have been injected into monkey genomes. Scientists believe it is only a small leap forward until we can produce humans that can see further, jump higher, run faster, and hear better. Maybe one day a literal Superman can be created. One of the more popular methods of achieving this is called germline gene therapy. It's an extra step to PGD. It involves sperm, eggs, or early embryos. Beyond the scope of just screening embryos, this method is used to add new genes. It will one day be possible to add any trait to a certain embryo. This method is already used in animals, and it is foreseen that this could lead to elimination of disease and disabilities by simply fixing genetic problems as they arise. This leads us to darker areas that spark immense controversy.
There are many ethical questions that need to be addressed with designer babies. Through religious beliefs, personal values, and scientific theory, where do we draw the line when it comes down to what's right and what's wrong? One moral issue is that just because you or I might want to have a tall child with blonde hair and blue eyes doesn't mean that this is what everyone wants. Most of the time, this isn't a problem because there will still be some diversity in preference for blonde and brown hair or blue and brown eyes. Maybe some won't want an athletic body because they themselves don't care for sports. But a problem arises in certain situations. What if we come across two deaf parents who've decided they want a deaf child because that's the way they lived? Now, many would see deafness as a disadvantage in society, and many would agree that the baby should have the choice. On the other hand, what if they chose to make sure their child wasn't deaf, but the child wanted to live as their parents did? Who can make these decisions? Should humans have the right to play God? Or does everyone deserve the right to a natural, unmodified birth? Some liken this to eugenics, where we attempted to advance the human species through more desirable traits. Where do we draw the line? What's desirable? Furthermore, who will have access to this technology? Logically speaking, this procedure won't be cheap, and the upper class will have access, leaving the rich again more powerful and creating a distinct line between rich and poor. Also, what if countries who don't share the same values abuse this technology to create athletic babies with superior intelligence who can dominate other countries at will? As strange as it sounds, could this one day be a real possibility? This would make us more into commodities than human beings.
Granted, the human species is genetically diverse, but what can the consequences of this be on our genes further down the line? Admittedly, we live in a society where many are skeptical about technology and worry about grave consequences that may or may not appear down the road. With genetic engineering, however, should we fear a limited gene pool? If we eliminate diseases and other factors, we change how genetically different we are. Some theorize that if we're all genetically similar, a mutation in a gene for a disease could make the entire population extremely susceptible. Then there is also the case of personal identity. PGD may damage the sense of self-worth and identity of disabled people that are already born. An example of an argument in this case is that the fewer deaf people who are born in the future, the less value the deaf people of today are bound to feel. In this situation, the individual identity is made vulnerable by the actions of others.
The creation of designer babies may be easy to justify in some cases, but in order to create one perfect baby, the number of embryos discarded may not justify the saving of one life. Nobody wants to watch their child die of a genetic illness, but where do we draw the line with even minor illnesses? Some say we are losing the concept of life given to us by a higher force, and it shouldn't be ours to manipulate. There is much difference with regards to opinions surrounding the issue, as has been stated. We will never create life, but should we be able to manipulate it? Only time will tell how we will handle this as a human species.